By the Fire presents A Desperate Soul by Dave Smale. Read for you by the author. Chapter 26. Letters from Before She Left Us. A line had spontaneously formed from the spot where Jacob stood next to the stage. Nearly everyone in attendance felt the need to offer condolences. The line went out the door of the sanctuary. Jacob didn't mind. He had nowhere else to be, and everybody had words of comfort. Most told him how much they'd miss his grandmother, and that they were praying for him. Some said, "We're here for you," or "Feel free to contact us if you need anything." Tilda's neighbors, along with Dr. Pollock, were among them. After more than an hour and nearly 200 handshakes, Jacob finally saw the end of the line. Someone else he recognized stepped up. "Remember me?" the man said. "Whoa, sure do," Jacob replied. "You're the cop. Officer Turnett." "Believe me, I've been called worse things than cop. At least you didn't call me ossifer. Then we might have some problems." "My name's Mike," he said, laughing and extending a hand which Jacob shook sheepishly. "You look a lot better than when we last met. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thanks," Jacob said. "And I guess you already know my brother, John," Officer Turnett said. A man in a white shirt, burgundy necktie, black slacks, and Oxford shoes stepped from behind the officer. He wore short cropped hair, gray at the temples, but looked otherwise youthful. "Everyone calls me Turnett," he said, shaking Jacob's hand. "Been a long time, Jacob." Jacob nodded. Seeing the man, he remembered. He'd been good friends with not only Tilda, but also Jacob's parents. "Listen," Turnett said, "give me a call. I'll help you get Tilda's car up and running. And if you need anything around the house fixed, I'd be happy to lend a hand. Your grandma and your parents were always a blessing to me and my family. It's the least I can do." Jacob wiped a tear from his eye, thanking the men before they turned to leave. Another person stepped forward. "Hey," said a young man he recognized. "Gavin! Wow! I didn't see you here before." "Yeah, I snuck in after it was over. Heard about the service online. I don't go for the church thing too much." Jacob glanced behind Gavin, forgetting momentarily that he'd lost the ability to see into the supernatural. "That's cool. I understand. Hey, thanks for coming still." "My pleasure. Give me a call if you need anything." "Okay, how?" "I'm on Dumb Down," Gavin said. Of course, Jacob thought. Everyone's on Dumb Down. Except Shayna. "Will do, man. Thanks," Jacob replied. Gavin turned to leave, but paused. "Oh, before I forget, I went to see Smoke Rings play after Bean kicked you out." "Oh, yeah?" Jacob feigned disinterest. "Yeah. He tried to replace you with 2 guitar players." Jacob wondered if they were the 2 freeloaders from the convenience store. "It was awful. They couldn't touch you. You should have heard the booing. A lot of people walked out," Gavin said. A satisfied smile crept across Jacob's face. "Thanks," Jacob said. The line continued for a few more minutes until the last of the condolence offerers shook his hand. Pastor Billy walked up behind him and put a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "You're still here?" Jacob asked, genuinely surprised. "Sure, why wouldn't I be?" "Figured you would have gone to lunch already," Jacob joked. "Without you?" Jacob perked up. "Really?" Billy laughed. "Sure. How's mac and cheese sound?" "Great." "I'm kidding, Jacob," Billy said. Jacob's expression fell. How about an actual restaurant? The pastor suggested. Like Taco Bell? The pastor burst into laughter. Or somewhere where we can sit down. T-Bell's got seats. Billy shook his head, smiling. Taco Bell it is, then. I'll need to lock the building before we go. And while I do that... Billy reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. Is that the letter my grandma sent you? Yeah, but not the one I read during the service. She actually sent us 3 letters in the same envelope. One was for the church, the one I read aloud today. One was for my wife and me, and he presented the paper to Jacob. This one was for you. Jacob stared at it in awe, as if it were coated in precious stones. His fingers gripped it gently and slowly, like it would break if he dropped it. The letter she sent us explained why she disappeared, the pastor said. Jacob's eyebrows raised as if to say, Explanation, please. The pastor took a breath. Basically, she saw a change in us. Well, really, in me. Ever since we bought our house, I had stopped hanging out with people from the church. And she'd noticed my preaching had grown dull. Like Talitha said during the incident in my backyard, remember? Jacob indeed remembered, but his memory was of Talitha repeating what the demons had told her to say. Pastor Billy had been downloading sermons off the internet. She was right. I had been preaching other people's sermons. Talitha knew, probably because she'd seen me do it. But Tilda knew because, well, she was one of the most spiritually adept people I've ever met. My sermons had been lacking the passion they used to. It's like I stand behind the pulpit and read a book report that someone else wrote. Why? Jacob asked. Good question. Because of my job, all our home remodeling projects, and all the counseling sessions. I left myself no time to pray, read my Bible, or study, let alone write sermons or hang out with people. Tilda brought all of it to my attention more than once, but I dismissed her. The pastor's expression drooped. Also, he continued, she had a problem with the fact that I launched several new churches which are accountable only to me. She told me that accountability went both ways. I should have a church council or a board of elders or something. Right now, every decision the church makes comes through me. It's way too much for one person to handle. My family's been paying the price for years. I see now that I've been going about things all the wrong way. Billy rubbed his forehead. Gosh, now that I think about it, it's like I set myself up as a king here. A dictator. Your grandma was right. But, again, I dismissed her. She told me several times that, with a church as large as this one, I should devote myself to ministry full time. But once again, I ignored her. Well, sounds like you ignored her as much as I did, Jacob said. Billy's eyes widened. Wow, I suppose you're right. So, she said all that in the letter she sent you? Oh, no. Her letter was very gracious. In fact, she apologized for leaving and not letting us know what she was doing. She only mentioned her grievances briefly, but said she simply couldn't give us her stamp of approval any longer. So she decided to go somewhere else. It was one of the most painful decisions she'd ever made. But she was right to do it. That's the biblical way. Jacob's brow furrowed. Billy explained. The Bible tells us that if you have something against someone, like a disagreement, you should go to that person and try to resolve it. If that doesn't work, you should bring the issue before 1 or 2 witnesses. If they still can't agree, go your separate ways. Problem was, her issues were with me. She tried to bring them to me, and I blew her off. So she tried to find a couple witnesses, but as she found out, no one was willing to be a witness against their own pastor. Or their king, Jacob added. Exactly, Billy confirmed. Except Turnette. Apparently he was willing. But that's only one person. She tried to find at least two, but couldn't. Since I've got no one I'm accountable to, Tilda basically had nowhere else to go. So, she left. She'd gone to a few other churches, but intended to come back here if her issues were ever addressed. But then she was hospitalized. She never got the chance to see if any of her grievances were rectified. Jacob nodded, considering all the pastor had said. So everything she said was right? Billy nodded. Yep. Sometimes it just takes a really awful tragedy for God to get your attention. Or in this case, my attention. Okay, but why are you telling me all this? Jacob asked. Accountability. I'd like you to hold me accountable if I don't work to fix this mess I've made, Billy said. You want me to? Why me? Why not Miss Taylor or the board or council or whatever? I don't have a council yet, but I talked to my wife about all this too. So between you and her, I think you guys will keep me honest. After all, like Talitha said, your family. Jacob smiled. Felt good to be part of a family again. All right, so what's the plan? How do you fix all that? He asked. Billy sighed. Some of it's easy. I put in my 2-week notice yesterday. I'll be going full-time here after that. And I've vowed never to preach anyone else's sermon again. Putting together a board of elders and making myself accountable to them might take a little more time. But I've already mentioned it to several of the long-term members. It's in the works. What about hanging out with people? Jacob asked. I'm starting that again right now, Billy said, grinning. Lunch at Taco Bell, remember? They shared a laugh. As for the letter she sent you, you can read it now, or... Jacob furiously unfolded the paper. I guess that means you'll read it now, Billy said with a smile, turning and walking away. I'll be in the van. Her penmanship was unmistakable. Neat, beautiful cursive, with flourishes in just the right places. How many times had he seen her grocery lists on sticky notes on the fridge? They looked more like poems. He remembered as a child sitting next to her in church as she took copious notes during sermons. He'd marveled at how someone could write so elegantly, yet so swiftly. The pen never left the page. But now Jacob's eyes filled with tears as he studied the letter. The calligraphic words were light and at times shaky. He imagined the deathly frail woman he'd seen in the hospital, allegedly his grandma, painstakingly writing not one, but 3 of these letters. It didn't seem possible. Yet he held evidence to the contrary. Blotting the tears with his sleeve, he read, My dearest Jacob, I am already gone if you're reading this. I know I was never the parent you deserved. Your mother and father were the best and only real parents you ever had. I could never replace them. But please know that I have always loved you as though you were my own son. You may not remember this, but after your parents' death, we spent many nights on my sofa, crying and holding each other. Without you there, I'm not sure I would have made it through that painful time. Thank you. For years, you were the only reason I got out of bed every morning. God gave me you, I am sure of that. I'm sure you feel that I didn't do a good job raising you, that I held you back from a great many things in this world. If you resent me for that, I'm sorry. I was trying to protect you from as much evil as I could. I hope someday you can forgive me. As you know, I was a member of the Lynnhaven Lighthouse for almost 20 years. You can trust Pastor Billy and Taylor. The Lighthouse is a good church filled with godly people. My lawyer will be contacting you if he hasn't already. The house, the car, and everything in them is yours. Do with them as you wish. There's an annuity in your name, too. I'm so proud of the man you've become, despite our many disagreements. I truly believe God has a plan for your life. I know you will do great things. Please don't hesitate to give your life to Jesus Christ. It will be the best decision you ever make in life. I go now to be with your parents and my granddaughter, your baby sister, who we never got to meet. I pray I get to see you again and be with you for all eternity. I'm sure they do too. I love you, Jacob. Grandma Tilda. Water droplets sprinkled the bottom of the page, falling from his eyes faster than he could wipe them away. He looked up at the ceiling, although, in his mind's eye, he was looking straight into heaven. He sobbed several times, took a breath, and declared, "I won't let you down, Grandma."
Hey, it's Jacob. I'm not a real rock star, but I might loosely be based on the author, who's also not a rock star. Hey, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and tell you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about it, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First off, it's free. Also, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast, like right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast so it can be heard on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership, and it's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm right now to get started.
Epilogue. Don't worry, we won't press charges. 3 months later. Jacob waited in the drab beige booth with the telephone on the wall and inch-thick glass in front of him. It was one of several booths. On the other side of the glass, a police officer stood, still as a statue, next to a door. A buzzer sounded, and the door opened. A line of 5 prisoners filed through. The one Jacob had come to see looked at him, rolled his eyes, and sighed. Bean took a seat on the other side of the glass, cuffed hands in front of him. He picked up the phone, put the receiver to his ear, cursed, and said,
"What do you want?"
Jacob smiled, expecting that very reaction.
"Just wanted to see how you were doing."
Bean sneered.
"How's it look like I'm doing?" "I'm kind of surprised you're still in here. I didn't press any charges."
"Yeah, well, you didn't have to. Once I got in here, they found my outstanding warrants. I'll be in here for another 4 or 5 months at least."
"Outstanding warrants?"
"It's none of your business, but..." Bean sighed. "Shoplifting when I was like 17, never showed up to the trial, and a couple unpaid speeding tickets." Jacob nodded.
"I had no idea."
"Yeah, obviously. So why are you really here?"
"Actually, a couple reasons. First, I wanted you to know that I'm sorry."
Bean grimaced. "Sorry? For what?"
"That last day, when I lived at your apartment, I wasn't trying to call you a liar. Just thought you should know."
"Right," Bean replied.
"It's true. Believe it or not, your choice. Oh, and before I forget, it turns out you knew my grandma."
"Your grandma?" Bean said incredulously.
"Yeah, Tilda O'Brien."
Bean stared at him blankly, shaking his head.
"From the Lynnhaven Lighthouse,"
Jacob clarified. Bean looked as if he'd been struck in the head by a pole. He took a breath, collected his thoughts, then sharpened his gaze into a glare.
"So that's how you knew,"
Bean said.
"Knew what?" "That day outside the liquor store. You called me a backslider. Regular people don't say that. That's a church word. That's how you knew. She told you." "Actually, no. She died a few days before that. I found out later that you went to the same church,"
Jacob said. Bean looked confused, and not the least bit sorry to hear of the news of Tilda's death.
"So how did you know?"
Bean asked.
"Long story. Probably an unbelievable one. Let's just say I could tell. But anyway—"
"Bullcrap," Bean cut him off. Only he didn't use the word crap.
"All right, fine. Here goes. When my grandma was on her deathbed, she prayed that God would open my eyes so I could see. And the result was, for about a week, I could see everything that was going on in the supernatural realm. Angels, demons, Jesus. When I saw you, you had 8 demons attached to you. That's the standard for backsliders."
Bean stared at him.
"Told you it was unbelievable. Anyway, I also wanted to tell you that I don't hold any grudge toward you. So whenever you get out of here, feel free to give me a call."
Bean continued to stare at him. His expression told Jacob that he wouldn't be hearing from him any time soon, if ever.
"Right, well, there's someone else who wants to say something to you,"
Jacob said. He motioned to someone in the waiting area. Bean couldn't see past the side walls of the booth. Jacob rose, smiled one last time, and stepped away. Bean's eyes widened as Talitha stepped into the booth. She sat, picked up the phone, and looked him directly in the eyes. She said nothing for 10 uncomfortable seconds while working up the nerve to speak. It was harder than she thought it would be. Finally, she said,
"I forgive you."
Now Bean looked like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer.
"You forgive me?"
he managed.
"Yes, for everything,"
she said. Bean was slack-jawed and silent.
"And I'm sorry,"
she said. He blanched. She explained.
"It was my fault that you left the church. I was selfish. If not for me, then you might not be in here right now. I hope—"
Talitha's eyes filled with tears.
"You can forgive me someday."
She broke eye contact with him and hung up the phone, sweeping out of the booth and stifling a sob. Bean watched her, speechless. A moment later, Pastor Billy stepped into the booth. Bean's eyes shifted to stare up at him, his mouth remaining agape. The pastor didn't sit, but leaned over and picked up the phone. "Don't worry, Oscar," Billy said. "Even though I wanted to, we won't be pressing charges. And believe me, I really wanted to. But Talitha's choice. If she can forgive you, so can I. No hard feelings. But the restraining order's still going to remain in place, so I'm afraid you can't come to the church. I'm sure you'll have no problem staying away, am I right?" The pastor hung up the phone and turned to leave. The 3 of them walked out of the precinct together. Talitha got into her father's car. Jacob's new/used car was parked in the space beside them. His new boss, the man everyone called Turnett, helped him get Tilda's car running again. Turned out all it needed was a new battery. "Well," Billy said, "now that that's over, what's next for you?"
"I officially finish high school next week," Jacob said.
"Congratulations!"
"I'm actually already done. They just have the little graduation ceremony."
"Really? They do a ceremony for you guys?" Billy inquired.
"Yeah. I'll get to walk across the stage and accept my diploma with my fellow dropouts," Jacob said. "Except there's no stage. We walk in front of a chalkboard in a classroom at the elementary school. There's only like 10 of us returning dropouts, but I get to wear a cap and a gown.
Ah, that's still pretty cool. This came from Tilda, who'd stepped out of the car to join the conversation.
Yeah, you guys can come if you want.
Billy and Talitha looked at each other and smiled. We wouldn't miss it, she said.
Cool. And I talked to the admissions office at Radcliffe, Jacob said. They said I'll be able to start in the spring. They're already in the fall semester.
So you are going to Radcliffe? Talitha asked.
Yep.
You know, I never had any doubt you had the brains for college, but just make sure you're going for the right reasons, Billy said. Jacob looked away. I know you've got an ulterior motive, the pastor said.
I need to find her, Pastor. I've got to know whether she did it or not. I might be a dad soon. I've tried to find her, but she's been keeping such a low profile. Nobody knows anything. If there was another way, I'd have done it already.
Pastor Billy smiled, patting Jacob on the shoulder. I see. Well, I'll keep you in prayer. By the way, great job on the bushes in front of the church. They look really good.
Thanks for finding me a job,
Jacob replied. Thank Turnett for running a successful landscaping company, Billy said. He speaks pretty highly of you. Jacob felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. The ringtone kicked in a second later. It wasn't the same song it used to be.
Speaking of Turnett, this is him now. Hang on.
Jacob answered, giving Turnett an update of what had just transpired at the jail, then said he'd be heading to his next job in a few minutes before ending the call.
No more Metallica?
Talitha asked.
Huh?
Your ringtone, she said, motioning toward his phone. Didn't it used to be a Metallica song?
Mm-hmm. Fade to Black. I changed it, he said, shrugging. It's still a great song, but I just thought it was time to move on.
Who was that? Your new ringtone song, I mean, she asked.
It's by Disciple. It's a song called Angels and Demons, Jacob said.
Angels and Demons, huh? Interesting choice, Billy observed. Jacob smiled. Disciple, Talitha said, nodding. I've heard of them, but I've never heard them. Maybe I'll check them out.
You should, Jacob said. Those guys rock. Great lyrics, too. I'm going to a show they're playing in Norfolk next month with 9 Lashes and Seventh Day Slumber.
Boy, Christian rock has come a long way since Petra and Stryper, huh? Billy said. They both looked at him, clueless. Y'all don't know nothing about that, Billy said, in an awful faux southern drawl. Dad, Talitha said, please, no. Just, no. Billy snickered. Anyway, that was Turnett, huh?
Yeah, Jacob answered. I gotta get to my next job. It's funny. I got a job and you quit yours.
Hey, now. Being a pastor is a full-time job, Billy corrected him. But honestly, this whole full-time ministry thing is not nearly as hard as I thought it would be. The money's tight, but definitely worth it. Wish I'd have done this years ago. I'm happier. Taylor's happier. The whole church is, I think. God seems to be blessing the decision. Our attendance was holding steady at about 250 people for about 8 or 9 years. It was like we hit a wall and couldn't get over it. Now we're up to 350 in the last couple months. And I've had more people come to me in the last 2 weeks expressing interest in ministry than I've had in the last 5 years. Billy paused, marveling. It's incredible. So anyway, how's your uncle? He's not being a pain, is he?
No, actually he's being really helpful, Jacob said. He's not trying to take the house or move in or anything. He just comes down every few weeks and checks on me, checks on the house, helps out where he can, then heads back to Pittsburgh.
Seems like a pretty nice guy.
He is. I think he just feels really bad about not talking to my grandma for so long.
I'll bet, Billy said. That decision will haunt him for years. Now, how about you? You doing okay, money-wise?
Oh yeah, I'm fine, Jacob said. Finally got access to that annuity. What a pain that was.
I can imagine. Well, don't spend it all in one place, Billy said as he and Talitha got into his new used compact car. Hey, we're going to do a little street evangelism tonight at the oceanfront. You game?
Jacob smiled. I wouldn't miss it.
Thank you so much for listening to A Desperate Soul on the By the Fire podcast. Since this was the final chapter, we'll be back with a new story next month. It's a toss-up between two of them. I haven't really decided yet, so just be looking for the announcement. But regardless of which story comes next, new episodes will begin airing on July the 9th. And I might even throw in a bonus episode before then, you know what I'm saying? So, as we wrap up this episode, just a few things to note. First, why don't you head over to my website, davesmail.com, sign up for my newsletter, and get your free novella, Safe House. Next, would you leave me a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser? I mean, do you like the show? Do you hate it? Do you love it? Are you indifferent? Is it just kind of meh? Either way, let me know. Or you can send me an email, info@davesmail.com. You can follow me on social media, Facebook and Instagram, @ByTheFireWithDave. On MeWe, search for the By the Fire with Dave Smail page. Parler, if you've been following me on Parler, you've probably noticed that I haven't been posting there. There seems to be a problem with that platform. It just won't let me post photos or videos. It's the strangest thing. So if they ever fix that, I'll start posting there again. And on the Twitter. Nope, don't have a Twitter account. On purpose. Anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed A Desperate Soul. I'll see you on July the 9th. Thanks again, and God bless. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.